The debate on global warming is over.
That was Al Gore. Back in 2006, ramping up his global warming rhetoric more than a year after his remarks. The debate isn't over. A Senate panel has just released a report yesterday that shows that more than 400 prominent scientists dispute Al Gore's claims. With us now is the author of the Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming and Environmentalism, Chris Horner, and Grist magazine writer David Roberts. David, one of your colleagues said just last month in your magazine that there were only about 24 global warming skeptics, only 24 climate change skeptics. It turns out there are 400. You want to clarify your magazine's math on that?
Well, I think you underestimated the amount of people you could turn up if you did a nationwide search for weathermen and economists and scientists from unrelated
hang
disciplines.
On. We're talking about the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Belgian Weather Institute, the Royal Netherlands Meteorological Institute. They're not exactly
the
TV
National
weathermen.
Oceanic Administration has released a consensus statement about global warming, supporting the basic consensus, as has the Association for the Advancement of Science, the National Science Academy, the National Science Academies of 13 separate countries, the G8 plus 5. There's no question about what the mainstream of science thinks.
What's the argument here? Because traditionally we've been told that all these guys who are skeptics are in the pay of the oil companies. This is like the chief meteorologist of the Metsul Meteorologia Weather Center in San Leopoldo, the head of the Geological Museum at the University of Oslo, all big shots with respected institutions. What's wrong with these guys?
Mark, if you want to know what climate scientists think, you should go ask climate scientists, not weathermen. They don't study climate science in meteorology school. I mean, it's not unclear what the mainstream of climate science thinks. It's not been unclear for a while now. I mean, these guys, Inhofe is tossing red meat to his base, and I knew his base was gullible, but this really takes the cake. A slight look at this list turns up some real gems. People with no relevant knowledge about the science. I mean, if you want to know how closed the debate is, here's a statistic for you. In 2006, the new CEO of ExxonMobil accepted the IPCC conclusions, and Exxon cut off funding for Chris's think tank. I mean, even the tobacco companies haven't cut off the funding for Chris's think tank. I mean, you're way behind the curve when ExxonMobil has turned its back on you.
You agree with that, Chris? We're just Holocaust deniers and flat earthers. Is that still the case?
Yeah, we just heard a fairly typically substantive discourse by the alarmists with two standard rhetorical devices. The appeal to authority, which means they don't have any substance they can offer you, and of course, much ad hominem about the individuals, without any names used. Let me just remind you about these backgrounds that are being slurred here. Meteorologists and economists and computer modelers, that's the background of the individuals who participate in the IPCC, and that's the perfect ideal background for individuals from Micronesia, Papua New Guinea, or someplace where they don't have a climate research budget, and you want to be called one of the world's leaders. However, if you would like to address the substance of this, you have 400 peer-reviewed authors who are now debunking, let's just say this, the two individuals, the two most important points are...
Chris, let me ask you this.
They're not peer-reviewed. They have not written peer-reviewed articles debunking global climate science.
Has there been one peer-reviewed study validating that either there's no global warming or that it's not caused by humans? Can you name one study that's peer-reviewed that's come to that conclusion?
Of course not, Alan, or they wouldn't be legislating it through press releases.
Excuse me. Look, there was just an article. Alan, I know you don't keep up with the climate science, so I don't expect you to know these things. Just for example, in the Royal Meteorological Society's current issue, there's an article by Douglas Christie, Singer, and two others, I believe, doing exactly what you said nobody's done. The point is, you really didn't say much. Their paper does debunk what you're saying hasn't been debunked. But yes, everybody agrees that the planet warmed when
David, let's deal with this issue of peer-reviewed science and whether or not the peer-reviewed scientists have truly looked at this and have come to Chris's conclusion here.
It's not my conclusion, Alan. I just gave you a cite. You can't debunk it.
It is your conclusion. The consensus statement of the National Academy of Sciences, I mean...
Stop appealing to authority. Speak substance to us, please.
Chris, the question was for David. Let David speak.
I'm not a scientist. I'm not a scientist. I'm a journalist. Chris is not a scientist. He's an industry lawyer. When I want to find out what scientists think, I ask scientists. When he wants to find out what science he's supposed to believe, he asks industry. I think we should ask the scientists what they think.
And
if that's appeal to authority, who else are you going to appeal to? When I want to know science, I appeal to scientists.
All right, Chris, the fact of the matter is you have cherry-picked.
Chris, you flunked out of 2 grad programs.
Chris, you have cherry-picked.
Al Gore is your obsession, not mine.
Chris,
I care what the National Academy of Sciences
You
says.
asked me for one article, and I gave you an article in this month's issue of the Royal Meteorological Society.
You came up with one article.
Thousands of articles. These are outliers.
Chris, they have
400 outliers.
The fact of the matter is, they have cherry-picked 400 scientists.
That's some
First of all, hold on, Chris, excuse me, Chris, let me ask you a question.
Mine's bigger than yours.
Chris, you've got to let me get in and ask you a question. Hold on just a second.
This list is 8
The discussion is whether there's a consensus. Whose is bigger is exactly the point.
Guys, our audience cannot hear either of you because you're both talking, and Chris, I got to be able to ask you a question. You got 400 scientists. They've been cherry-picked. Most of them are not climatologists. You've got 25 to 30 of them who are funded by ExxonMobil. And I can come up with a whole group of well-known scientific organizations with peer-reviewed scientists who basically show and agree with the UN report that there is human effect on climate change, and something we have to pay attention to. The 400 you're talking about is a pittance compared to the vast number of scientists who believe otherwise.
Actually, you said you're going to ask a question. I think you just did. Mine's bigger than yours, Alan. This is 400 names after.
You're quite a man.
After you take out the ExxonMobil. The most names you can point to are 51 authors of the UN IPCC Fourth Assessment Report, Summary for Policymakers, Working Group 1. It's the biggest list you can point to. Mine's bigger than yours,
Chris,
Alan. Show me your authority.
You're quite impressive. Thank you very much for being with us.